Welcome to the Great Basin Weekly Fuels Briefing. This is Gina Palma. Looking at our precipitation over the last week, we have continued to see thunderstorms over the eastern two-thirds of the Great Basin, although precipitation has still been spotty and a little bit more spotty than what we saw a couple of weeks ago. However, we have seen very dry areas in parts of western and southern Nevada and also into parts of the central Idaho mountains and across southern Idaho. Even in Utah, where the moisture is a little bit more continuous, we are seeing plenty of pockets of drier air. Any precipitation we have been seeing with these thunderstorms has been well above normal, but again, it's been very localized. Looking at our lightning over the last 7 days, we've had a significant amount of lightning almost in all areas, with the exception of parts of those drier areas of the western half of the Great Basin. These thunderstorms we will continue to watch as we see much hotter and drier conditions move in for the next week to see if any holdovers pop up with this amount of lightning. Looking at the drought conditions, our current long-term drought is here on the right, so we still have severe to extreme drought across much of the area, with still exceptional drought in southwest Idaho and northeast Nevada. The only areas either absent of drought or just seeing abnormally dry conditions are far western areas and parts of the central Idaho mountains. However, looking at the last week or two with the moisture that's continued across the region, you can see in the evaporative demand drought index improvements in drought, and so at least these areas of drought are not worsening under these conditions. Now looking at the days since precipitation, here on the left is the days since any amount of precipitation, and then on the right, days since wetting rains. And you can definitely see we've seen many areas at least experience some light precipitation, but still pockets in western Utah and southern Nevada, and even up north that haven't seen any precipitation in over 1 to 2 months. And then looking at wetting rains, a little bit of a different picture where we are seeing many areas in southern Nevada and even up into central Nevada, western Utah that have not seen wetting rains in over 2 months, and even up north about anywhere between 1 and 2 months, some areas have not seen wetting rains. Even in this area in central Nevada, where we haven't seen rain in 2 months, is where the New Pass fire developed recently. Looking at 10-hour fuel moisture, most recently we've seen very dry conditions still over the western half of the Great Basin despite this moisture, and still a little bit better over the eastern half of Utah into Wyoming, but again, we will see hotter and drier conditions, so these conditions will significantly change in the coming week. Looking at how our fire danger has changed in the last week, here on the left was our ERC percentile map for last week, and then fast forward to this week. Even with just the drier conditions we've seen in many areas and warming temperatures, we have seen ERCs continue to rise, with many areas above the 80th to 90th percentile, and some areas probably approaching the 97th percentile at this time. Great Basin fire activity continues to be high. We see light to moderate initial attack nearly every day, with new large fires developing, and you can see our current large fires here on the map across the Great Basin. Great Basin remains at PL3, with Nick still at PL5. Now looking at some of our fire danger area specific, starting in the north, you can see starting in the Payette here in the top right, although we did see the big dip with the more significant precipitation about a month or so ago, conditions have been rebounding, and looking at the forecast, the green line, for the next week, we will see those ERCs continue to tick upwards towards that 97th percentile. In southwest Idaho, where we had the big grass fire move in from Oregon, and also other fires in southwest Idaho, ERCs again trending upwards and will likely exceed the 97th percentile. We're also seeing these conditions in western Wyoming, although ERCs stayed a bit lower with some of the more continuous higher humidity and scattered showers and thunderstorms. These will quickly rise to near record levels as we get into next week. Now looking at some of the fire activity and some of the fuel conditions across Idaho, starting first up in the north and central Idaho, the Payette and Salmon Chalice, we have seen recent showers and thunderstorms bring wetting rain mostly to the Salmon Chalice, with much drier conditions further west into the Payette. And on July 24th, we did have the Tartar fire start in the lower elevations of the Payette and the Boise, and this has quickly grown to over 12,000 acres. Down south in Boise, we continue to see a significant smoke from Oregon, so those are definitely affecting visibility and air quality across all of eastern Oregon into Idaho. So this will continue off and on with some of the thicker smoke for some time until these fires are really no longer an issue. And we have seen, again, the Tartar fire. It was quite active up in the north. We also saw over 29,000 acres of growth or of fire activity up in Idaho Also, in addition, the 150,000 acres that burned in from the big grass fire. Looking over into the Twin Falls and eastern Idaho areas, although we did have some recent moisture and we have had no real large fires in those areas, we continue to see fires grow to over 50 to 100 acres. And we continue to see drops in sagebrush fuel moisture over the last week, with Ohio Gulch seeing the most drastic drop. Although some areas did see some rises in moisture, that we will see those hotter and drier conditions move in. So again, rapidly changing conditions. Now looking over in Nevada and parts of the north and really western areas that are already above the 80th percentile, we'll continue to see these ERCs rise to near or above the 97th percentile. Areas in the east that saw a little bit more consistent moisture are still in the 70 to 80th percentile, but will also quickly rise to above the 90th percentile. Looking at some of our fire activity and fuels conditions, starting up north in the Elko area, we did have a couple of new large fires with the Chimney Fire and the Secret Pass Fire. A Chimney Fire over 20,000 acres, and the Secret Pass Fire grew to over 3,000 acres. Despite recent wetting rains and above normal precipitation in a large portion of northeast Nevada, in some areas it was still spotty, and we still have significant drought in the region, along with tree mortality in the pinyon juniper, the juniper especially, and even in the sagebrush. So we are seeing fire behavior return to higher levels much quicker than what we would normally expect with that type of precipitation. Over into the western portion of Nevada and the Carson Battle Mountain areas, we have the New Pass Fire, which has grown to over 23,000 acres. Sagebrush live fuel moisture remains below average, and recent fires have been burning in PJ, grass, and heavy dead and down and 1,000-hour fuels, which was also evident on the Elephant Fire in the far western portion of the region. Higher elevation fire behavior has been matching lower elevations. Looking at fire danger now across Utah. In the north, the main area of the state that has been a bit drier, so ERCs are above the 80th percentile. We will see those rises where ERCs continue above the 97th percentile in the next week, could even approach records as we get later into next week. Other areas of Utah saw a little bit more moderated fire behavior, but even with these moderated conditions, which we'll talk about, we still have large fires that are showing extreme fire behavior. So although these ERCs are still between the 50th and 80th percentile, they will also quickly rise to above the 90th percentile. So looking at some of this fire activity, again, with the recent moisture, starting first on the Fish Lake, we did have quite a bit of moisture in that area, although some areas did miss some of the more significant wetting rains. But fire behavior really rebounded quickly, and we have the Widemouth 2 fire that quickly grew to over 6,000 acres and even had a report of a fire whirl on the fire. So we are still seeing some extreme fire behavior, which is, again, a bit surprising to return so quickly, even with the fire danger showing still some moderating conditions. So as we get hotter and drier and those ERCs and fire dangers continue to rise, we will likely see an uptick in large fire activity and fire behavior as we go into next week. Looking at Unit 11, 12, and 13, which takes us across the northern and eastern portion of the state. It's kind of a tale of two cities where we have been getting more wetting rains up high with moderated fire behavior and still very dry down low. So we are waiting on some new sagebrush fuel moisture to see how much effect, if any, this moisture has really had. Otherwise, most of the fires in the eastern portion of the state have been single tree with no control issues. And then down south in southern Utah and the Arizona Strip, we are still seeing reports of tree mortality, especially in the Ponderosa and the Arizona Strip area. And we are still seeing plenty of dried grasses, again, despite any of the recent moisture. Looking at how our critical fuel status map has changed over the last week, the only difference really is over parts of southern and eastern Nevada, where we did see a little bit more moderating conditions with that moisture, and most areas have returned to critical status. Looking at any precipitation going forward, just over the next couple of days, we will still see some scattered showers and thunderstorms bringing spotty precipitation to the eastern half of the region, but otherwise we will see much drier and hotter conditions later this week and really through the early and mid portion of next week. So again, we will see fire behavior and our fuels conditions change pretty rapidly over the coming week. That concludes our webcast for this week. Check back next week for the latest updates.